There's a new day dawning, the time is at hand, where the glory of the Lord will be revealed to every man. Open the door, open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in. Open the door. Open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in.
Oh, let the King of Glory in. Open up the door starts right now. So fling wide through heavenly gates. Prepare the way of the risen Lord. The Apostle John was on the island of Patmos. He was in prison for the testimony of Jesus Christ. And he heard a sound behind him and said, Behold, I looked. There was a door standing open in heaven. And I heard a voice which was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, Come up here, and I will show you the things which must take place. That's what we need, my friends. We need a heavenly perspective of the things that are going on in the world around us. The things that the Word of God foretold us would come to pass. Those things which must take place. Those things which are taking place even now. And that is what this broadcast is all about. Discussing the issues of the day. Discerning the times in which we live from a biblical perspective and worldview. Good afternoon, everybody. Annie White here, and what you are about to hear is, as I always say and always remind you, it is the fusion of heart, mind, and soul. I just want to welcome everybody from all across the fruited plain and all around the spherical globe. Thanks for tuning in to another excursion, an edition of Open Up the Doors. Hey, do me a favor. If you are listening, please go on over and visit my Open Up the Doors Facebook page at facebook.com, Faith FM 91.7. If you've never liked the page, please like the page. And I am also broadcasting live on Facebook. We are streaming this across the fruited plain, around the spherical globe, off my Open Up the Doors Facebook page. So, hey, for those of you who are on Facebook, please, please, please share this into your streams. It's going to be a hot topic today. But I am looking for as much of an interactive experience as I can have here and Open Up the Doors. So I need those of you who are on Facebook Live to keep just shooting me some questions, some comments, some insights as the program progresses. Get a conversation going on over there and just join in the conversation. If you are outside of the Faith FM broadcast area, you can download the free Faith FM app. We have the app for the Android platform, the Apple platform. You can go on over to Google Play or the iTunes Store, whatever your device operating system is, and get that free app. Best way to listen to Faith FM if you're outside of the broadcast area. We are streaming across the internet at hamptonschristian.com, which is the home church here in Sag Harbor, Hampton's Christian Fellowship, which is the church here and the proprietors, I guess you could say, of Faith FM, the founders of Faith FM. But anyway, if you'd like to, did I give you my email address? If you'd like to email me, I got to get through all these preliminaries out of the way. If you'd like to email me, you can email me at ajwhite777 at iCloud.com. It's ajwhite777 at iCloud.com. If you have Facebook and you're on Facebook and you're on over there and Open Up the Doors and you hit the email button there, that works as well. Well, I want to get to it. I got to get to it. I don't know if anybody caught the Democratic debate last night. Probably most of my listening audience probably couldn't stomach it. I didn't watch too much of it either because I couldn't stomach it, but I saw the highlights, and it just has got me to a place where I got to ask some questions, and I want to put this out to everyone today. We're going to talk about some very serious stuff, but I want to raise this question. Could it happen? Could it happen here? The unthinkable, the unimaginable. Could it happen here? 12 years ago, when Barack Obama was running for president, I wrote an article called The Coming Great Deception. Back then, I asked if America was ready to be transformed and renamed the United Socialist States of America. Back then, people said that was preposterous. The liberal media accused one of racism if you even mentioned that Obama and the Dems were pushing this nation towards socialism. Of course, socialist Marxism has absolutely nothing to do with race, of course. But the left never ceases to play the race card with every breath they take. It becomes nauseating, quite honestly. But I don't digress already. But to even suggest back then that Obama was a socialist, it was taboo back then. Well, we've seen where the last 12 years have led, have we not? Now it's a given that the left has all but taken over the Democratic Party. And it's all but given over to a socialist worldview. So now then, 12 years later, I want to ask a similar question as I asked 12 years ago, but I'm going to ask it a little differently. 12 years ago, I asked, are you ready for the United Socialist States of America? 12 years later, I'm going to ask you this question. Are you ready, America? Could it happen here? Are you ready for a communist revolution? Could it happen here? Could America actually elect a communist as president? Because among the Democrats, my friends, Bernie Sanders is pulling ahead of the pack. He's polling in double digits. It's something I have been keeping a track on lately because I really don't like to trust the polls. Really, polls are worthless for the most part. But one thing that you need to really keep an eye on, because this is the same thing that happened with Donald Trump 4 years ago. The polls kept saying he was going to lose, But the crowds at his rallies were growing and growing and growing. And it's been often reported that the day before the election, back in 2016, that when all the polls were saying Hillary was going to win, Donald Trump had these rallies there in Wisconsin, and he turned around to his people and said, how are we going to lose? He had 20, 25,000, 30,000 people coming to his rallies. And he turned around and said, how are we going to lose? I don't understand these polls. Well, he didn't. Don't trust the polls, but watch the crowds, because the crowds can tell you something. And have you been noticing the size of Bernie's crowds lately? Bernie Sanders last Sunday in Denver, Colorado, drew an estimated crowd of 11,400 people. A crowd his campaign at that point was describing as the largest rally any presidential candidate has held in Colorado this cycle. Bernie was originally slated to hold the rally at the Colorado Convention Center's Belco Theater, which has a 5,000-seat capacity, but it was moved at the last minute to another hall, the Exhibition Hall, which boasts a 12,000 capacity, and it was almost packed due to high demand. In Tacoma, Washington, just the other day or last week, supporters packed the Tacoma Dome and chanted Sanders' name, Bernie, Bernie. I wrote a song last week called Bernie and the Squad. I don't know if I'm going to really sing it, but I had a moment of inspirational insanity. But that's what they're chanting. They're just chanting, Bernie. But they chanted for Bernie as he appeared on the stage after being introduced by Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, a Seattle Democrat who is chairing Bernie's Washington State campaign. And that Tacoma Dome holds about 23,000 people. And the campaign said there was more than 17,000 in attendance there. So you're watching these rallies, folks. Bernie Sanders' success in the early going of this Democratic presidential primary process may seem like a joke and a folly to many of us watching from afar. But I want to tell you this. It's something that we shouldn't take lightly. During an interview with Huntsville, Alabama, radio's WVNN there in Huntsville, Alabama, Representative Mo Brooks, who's a Republican in Alabama, was being interviewed there, and he discussed how socialism is on the rise in the United States, which is reflected obviously by Bernie Sanders as well as Elizabeth Warren. They're all leftists. Even when the media starts talking about Pete Buttigieg or Amy Klobuchar as being moderates, they're not moderates. They're all leftists. They're all leaning socialists. It's just that crazy Bernie is a communist. And I'm not just throwing that word around. I'm going to get into some stuff in the next block of this broadcast. We're going to take a walk down history lane about Bernie Sanders because it needs to be put out there time and time over and over again because it's dangerous what's going on, folks. But when we see the elections of people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and these other self-proclaimed socialists of the squad, The squad right now is taking over the Democratic Party. They are on the verge of implosion, my friends. There's a lot of stuff going on, and sometimes I feel like I just want to pick out a bowl of popcorn and watch them just all explode. But let's be clear, Congressman Brooks said. Let me get back to his radio interview there in Huntsville, Alabama. Let's be clear, he said. The socialists are gaining. Quote, they're winning. And those of us who support free enterprise, we continue to lose ground in the arena of public opinion and in elections. 50 years ago, and he's quite right, 50 years ago, Bernie Sanders or other socialists like him would never have gotten elected to anything. I'll even say maybe 30 years ago. But although Sanders was getting elected, he got elected mayor up there in Vermont, or wherever he lives. Or we'll get to that in a moment, Birmingham or something. But Congressman Brooks in his interview said, 50 years ago, these guys wouldn't have been elected to anything. Now, however, they are getting elected. And that means they're advancing. Do they advance to the point where they control Washington? Well, he says no. But it's a question of trends. It's a question of trajectory. Congressman Brooks said no. But if the trend lines continue, then we will be a socialist nation. And we will suffer the long-term consequences that inevitably occur when you adopt socialism. It's a loss of freedom. It's a loss of liberty. It's a loss of the ability to take care of your own family. In a letter to the editor of the Orlando Sentinel, I came across this as I was perusing the news feed. A subscriber submitted a letter to the editor, and this is what they wrote. I was 9 years old in 1956 when I read that Russia's communist leader, Nikita Khrushchev, said, quote, we will take America without firing a shot. We don't have to invade the U.S. We will destroy you from within. And this person wrote, I distinctly remember thinking at my tender age, that will never happen. And now I am horrified to see Khrushchev's words coming true. Folks, if I've quoted this once, I've quoted a million times. Vladimir Lenin said the goal of socialism is communism. For Orthodox Marxists, socialism is the lowest stage of communion based on the principle of from each according to his ability, to each according to his contribution, while the upper stage, communism, is based on the principle of from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. In just the 4 years of listening to Bernie Sanders, 4 years ago, Bernie Sanders was operating under from each according to his ability to each according to his contribution. I don't know if anybody's noticed this, but now he's talking in the upper stage verbiage, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. In other words, he's going to take from the rich, he's going to take from those who have and just give it to others, period. That's the upper stage of communism, the upper stage of socialism, which leads to communism. And under Marxism, this upper stage becomes possible only after the socialist stage further develops economic efficiency, and the automation of production has led to the superabundance of goods and services. I'm giving you this textbook definition because this is how they sneak in. When you see the squad, when you see these so-called democratic socialists talk about things like Denmark and Finland and Sweden, which I will get to in a moment, they always refer to the first stage. You see, these countries, I'm probably going to jump ahead of myself here because I've got so much stuff I want to share. But socialism first works off the back of a real strong economy that was developed by capitalism. Just put that into the back of your mind, because this is exactly what they did in Sweden. This first stage, socialism, is what they did use in Sweden. But it failed miserably. But Bernie always likes to point to Sweden. And even last night, he pointed to Denmark, which I'll get to in a moment. But he never tells you the full story, because either he's ignored it, or he's just like left his brain back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s or something. But Sweden, folks, has abandoned the Bernie Sanders approach a long time ago because it failed. As I said a moment ago in last night's debate, he brings up Denmark. What a ridiculous comparison. A country of barely 6 million people, a country that's got no military, a country that's got no comparison whatsoever to America. It's ridiculous to compare Denmark's economy to America's in any way, shape, or form. As a matter of fact, Bernie, just recently, because these people over in Europe, they're listening to this stuff and they're shaking their heads. And the people in Sweden and the leaders in Denmark, they're saying, no, we're not socialist. Bernie keeps talking about these democratic socialist countries. But just recently, a free market think tank in Denmark, the Center for Political Studies, issued a 20-page report telling Americans that, 1, Denmark is not a socialist nation, and 2, the statist policies that were there have caused significant economic harm. Denmark is not socialist, but it is incredibly overtaxed. It's a huge welfare state. So today, when Sanders talks about socialism, he'll tell you, oh, I'm not looking at Cuba, but he did. We'll get to that in a moment. I'm not looking at Cuba. I'm looking at countries like Denmark and Sweden. Hello, Bernie. They're telling you they're not socialist. They're telling you that they don't abide by even the policies you're talking about here in America. Denmark's prime minister came to America several years ago purposely to refute Bernie Sanders' claims. Quote from then president of Denmark, Denmark is far from a socialist planned economy. And why? Because they tried it and it failed. And they were riding for years on the inertia of their economic boom under capitalism. But like Margaret Thatcher always used to say, sooner or later you run out of everybody else's money. Because history has shown time and time and time again that the socialist policies that these dreamers advocate, they never ever work over the long haul. And they have failed miserably every time and everywhere they've been tried. But, they put their ears over their heads, because the facts of history notwithstanding, these people like AOC and Rashida Tlaib and Omar and Bernie, Bernie and the squad, sung to the tune of Benny and the Jets. But they keep on trying anyway. Because ultimately, it really is nothing but a play for power, my friends. That's what it's always been about. Despite their rhetoric of equity and fairness and being for the working class. Oh, last night, if Bernie said we're going to stand up for the working people, we're going to stand up for the middle class, we're going to stand up for the workers. You know that old communist saying, "Workers of the world unite." Somebody I heard somebody at the Emmys or the Grammy, I think it was the Emmys or whatever. I don't watch those award shows, but I know that a week or two ago there was like the Hollywood award shows, and I heard that somebody who won an award stood up, some actress, and actually just basically started quoting out of the Communist Manifesto, when she started saying, "Workers of the world unite." I mean, it never works out that way, never. And we've got 100 years of history to prove it never works out that way. It's simply about centralized government and a power grab. But there's always some of those useful idiots available to fuel the revolution. That's why when Nikita Khrushchev said back in the 50s, he said this: we cannot expect the Americans to jump from capitalism to communism, but we can assist. Listen to what he said back in 1956. Nikita Khrushchev, I'm old enough to remember him. I have these black and white gray memories of seeing Nikita Khrushchev on TV when I was a little boy. And this is what he said: we cannot expect the Americans to jump from capitalism to communism, But we can assist their elected leaders in giving Americans small doses of socialism until they suddenly awake to find they have communism. Hello! Could it happen here? Bernie Sanders is Nikita Khrushchev's dream come true, my friends. I can hear some of my Bernie friends yelling at me right now. Oh, I've got a few of them. I can hear them yelling. I just had a conversation with somebody the other day. Don't call Bernie a communist. What? I had this conversation with somebody the other day, a friend of mine. Salvadoran friend of mine, came from Salvador. He came up from Salvador back in the 80s when the communists were trying to overrun his country. He fled Salvador to flee the communists. So in the course of our conversation, we were just talking about things. He mentioned Bernie Sanders to me and suggested he was going to vote for him, and I was stunned. I said to him, this just happened 2 days ago. I said, you fled Salvador because you feared the communists. And now you're thinking of voting for one? This is what he said to me. Oh, Bernie is not that kind of a communist. I just looked at him. I almost bit his head off. In love. I love him. He's a good friend of mine. Bernie is not that kind of a communist. Yes, my friends. Yes, he is. He may not be wearing army fatigues or camo. But Bernie is a commie revolutionary in a suit and tie. So don't fall for the deceptive makeover of his communist history. And here's just the problem. Most of the electorate is malinformed, misinformed, and miseducated, especially the millennials. People today, they live off the sound bites that the media feeds them. They come to believe the narrative that gets daily drummed up into them by the media at large. And very few people do their own research and homework. It's much, much easier to follow the zeitgeist. So I asked the question rhetorically. Could it happen here? Don't take it for granted that it couldn't. Stick around. I'll be right back. Here's Daryl Evans. Time for a Selah break. Freedom is our song. Stick around, folks. I'll be right back.
Freedom is our song. We've been delivered. Our chains are gone. And
Jesus is our liberator. Daryl Evans, freedom is our song. And I just really wanted to play that as I was sharing off air with my Facebook people over there on my Facebook live streaming. That's what I'm doing here on Open Up the Doors on Faith FM. I am streaming live if you're just joining us over on my Open Up the Doors Facebook page at facebook.com/faithfm 91.7. If you're just tuning in, please join us over there, join the conversation. But as I was sharing with the folks over there, I'm talking about a communist revolution. Is it possible to be happening here in America? So I wanted to play a song that no matter what happens, folks, because it's not about fear-mongering, but it is about informing so that we know how to pray and we know how to push back against the enemy and we know how to speak the truth and to speak the truth in love. But no matter what happens, we know that Jesus is our liberator. We know that when we're in Jesus, we are free and fully alive. And I just love that tune. But anyway, let me move on because I'm talking about, if you're just tuning in, I see some folks are just coming on Facebook Live there. Could it happen here? Could the unthinkable happen here? Could the unimaginable happen here? 12, 13 years ago, we were told we weren't allowed to call Obama a socialist. Today, 12 years later, it's reasonably acknowledged by most people. But now we're being told we can't call Bernie a communist. Incrementalism. It's what socialists do, you know. Antonio Gramsci's long march through the societal institutions is nearly complete. You know, we've talked about Antonio Gramsci on this broadcast before. He's known as the father of cultural Marxism, and he taught and believed in the transformation of society into a communist state through the gradual infiltration of its institutions. That's what Nikita Khrushchev was getting at, because Gramsci was friends with Stalin. They knew Antonio Gramsci very well. They palled around with him, Italian communists. But this is what Gramsci said. I've quoted it before. But by way of reminder, Antonio Gramsci said socialism is precisely the religion. Did you catch that? He acknowledged that socialism was a religion, a humanist religion, an atheistic religion, a man-made religion. But he said socialism is precisely the religion which must overwhelm Christianity. In the new order, socialism will triumph by first capturing the culture via infiltration of schools, universities, churches, and the media by transforming the consciousness of society. Gramsci said this back in the 1920s and 30s. Hello, we're here. In 2007, I was calling Obama a socialist, my friends, long before anybody else was. That's true. Not because I flippantly throw around terms, but because I went and did my research on him and looked at what he himself had said and had written. Therefore, make no mistake about it. Despite Bernie's euphemistic self-identification as, quote-unquote, a democratic socialist, bunch of nonsense, he is, in the core of his ideology, a dyed-in-the-wool communist. No matter what his nascent neo-socialist Kool-Aid drinkers want you to believe, it's all euphemistic. No matter how much you want to try and mainstream Bernie Sanders' ideology, it requires a whole lot of whitewashing of his radical pro-communist past. And we're going to go right now through a stroll. We're going to do one of my strolls down memory lane to more accurately review the historical record of Bernie Sanders. Let's rewind to 1964. While attending the University of Chicago, Sanders joined the Young People's Socialist League, which was the youth wing of the Socialist Party USA. He also organized for a communist front group, the United Packing House Workers Union, which at the time was under investigation by the House Committee on Un-American Activities. After graduating with a political science degree, Sanders moved to Vermont, where he headed the American People's History Society, an organization for Marxist propaganda. While there, he produced a glowing documentary on the life of socialist revolutionary Eugene Debs, who was jailed for espionage in the U.S. and hailed by the Bolsheviks as, quote, America's greatest Marxist. For those of you who don't know who Eugene Debs was, look him up on Google. He was the head of the American Communist Party who actually ran. He actually tried to run for president back in the day. But Bernie wrote a documentary on Debs. Debs was convicted under the Espionage Act of 1917, sentenced to 10 years in prison. But to this day, from what I hear, from what I've read, Sanders still hangs a portrait of Eugene Debs on the wall of the Senate office. In the early 70s, Sanders helped found the Liberty Union Party, which called for the nationalization of all U.S. banks and the public takeover of all private utility companies. Can somebody say Hugo Chavez? This is Marxism. This isn't democratic socialism, which, by the way, doesn't really exist. It's a meaningless term. But that's what he helped found in the 1970s. Sanders, in 1981, managed to get elected mayor of Burlington, Vermont, which it's ironic. Their license plate says, live free or die. How ironic that this communist comes from a state whose license plate says, live free or die. Well, we're going to take you up on that, Bernie. But when he became a mayor of Burlington, he restricted property rights for landlords, set price controls, and raised property taxes to pay for communal land trusts. It got so bad that the local small business is distributed flyers complaining that their new mayor, quote, does not believe in free enterprise. And of course not. Marxists don't. It was somewhat humorous last night to some degree, as much as I don't like Michael Bloomberg, and as much as Michael Bloomberg doesn't have a chance, especially after such a bad performance in that debate last night. It was somewhat humorous to see Michael Bloomberg go after Sanders, capitalism versus communism, and Bernie got really burnt. Oh, did you see when Bernie got burnt when Bloomberg called him a communist? He got red in the face. Don't call me a communist. I'm a socialist. No, you're a communist, Bernie. You've embraced communism your entire life. In the 1980s, Sanders took several goodwill trips, quote unquote, not only to the USSR, but also to Cuba and Nicaragua, where the Soviets were trying to expand their influence in our hemisphere. In 1985, he traveled to Managua to celebrate the rise to power of the Marxist-Leninist Sandinista government. He called that Sandinista revolution, do you remember Daniel Ortega back in the 80s? Well, Bernie Sanders called it a heroic revolution, undermining anti-communist U.S. policy that we had at the time. If you remember the little bit of a scandal that Ronald Reagan fell into at that time with Colonel Oliver North, when we were selling arms to Iran at that time. Iran at that time was fighting Iraq and was fighting against Saddam Hussein, and we got caught up selling them arms so that we could have money surreptitiously sent to the guerrillas who were fighting against the Sandinistas, the Contras. A little bit of a history lesson here. But Bernie was on the side of the Sandinistas, and he went down there, and he celebrated with them. Oh, I'm not a communist. Yes, you are, you lying snake. Oh, yes, I'm going to say it, because we need to say it. Vermont in the 1980s, okay, I'm missing my place here. Let me get back to my history lesson here. When Bernie was asked about his support for the Sandinistas, he went down there while he was mayor. That's why I had that line there. He was mayor in Burlington in the 1980s. He goes down to visit in Managua in support of the Sandinistas. And in light of the food shortages in the country that resulted in people standing in bread lines, and you can look this up. You can Google this. Go ahead. Do the fact checks, my friends. Do your homework. Because this is a quote from Bernie Sanders. Quote, "It's funny sometimes American journalists talk about how bad a country is, that people are lining up for food. But this is a good thing." Listen to what he's saying here, people. Bernie Sanders is saying that it's a good thing that people are lining up for food. In other countries, people don't line up for food. The rich get the food and the poor starve to death. Yeah, like in the communist USSR, like in the Maoist communist China, like in communist Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge, or communism under North Korea, or communism today in Venezuela, which we'll get to in a moment. Yeah, the rich get the food and the poor starve to death, because once you go from the lower form of socialism to the full form of socialism, communism, you know what it's like, Bernie? It's like socialism for thee, but not for me. It's like that one zinger that Michael Bloomberg got out at you last night. You're doing pretty good for a socialist. You're a millionaire when you have 3 houses. There was a time when Bernie used to complain about millionaires, but ever since he became one, now he just complains about billionaires. Did you notice that? Yeah, but according to Bernie Sanders, food lines are good, saying that rationing was a sign of equality and success. This is nuts. Sanders, back in the 80s, adopted a Soviet sister city outside of Moscow. He took his honeymoon with his second wife to the USSR. Does anybody go on a honeymoon to Moscow? I mean, come on, folks. It's the early 80s. We're still in the height of the Cold War. And, you get married and you think you want to go to the Caribbean, you want to go to Bermuda, you want to go to some nice place. No, Bernie, we're going to go, hey, honey, I got a great idea for a honeymoon. Let's go to the USSR, the USSR. Back in the US, back in the US, back in the USSR. Who goes to Moscow for a honeymoon? But I'm not a communist. That's just crazy. This is true, folks. In 1989, as the West was on the verge of winning the Cold War, Sanders addressed the National Conference of the U.S. Peace Council. Sounds great, the U.S. Peace Council. But it was known as being a front for the Communist Party, USA, whose members swore an oath not only to the Soviet Union, but to, quote, the triumph of Soviet power over the U.S. Bernie spoke at one of their conferences. In more recent times, he has lauded Venezuelan socialism as a model, though he's had to walk it back since the disaster of it's happening in real time. Funny how reality can kick you in the head, huh? In 2011, Bernie Sanders said that, quote, these days the American dream is more apt to be realized in South America, in places like Ecuador, Venezuela, and Argentina. Really? If that's the case, why are they all fleeing to come here? Hello? I got to get to a break here, folks. But despite the fact that Bernie likes to downplay his communism and call it democratic socialism, despite these facts of Bernie's history, we're being told by his campaign and his supporters that his brand of socialism isn't Marxist at all. It's lies and it's subterfuge. And I got to tell you, I have to admit that having to deal with the Bernie Sanders campaign from 4 years ago, I didn't think we were going to need to go through all this again. But we're here. But Bernie and the squad. You know, in a sane world, no one would believe he could win. But we are living in anything but a sane world anymore. In a sane world, one would say he doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of winning. But folks, don't take anything for granted in this present-day climate, my friends. And if Bernie Sanders were ever to become president, it would be a nightmare of unbelievable proportions. He would make Hillary and Obama look like constitutional conservatives. And they ain't. But stick around, because I got a lot more to come. Here's Matt Redman. We are the free. And I plan on staying that way. Share this out into your video streams, folks. Thanks. I'll be right back. The fusion of heart, mind, and soul. This is Open Up the Doors with Andy White here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in Napeague, WEGQ 91.7 in Quag. And thanks for joining in, everybody, all across the fruited plain and all around the spherical globe. If you're just joining in, well, we've only got a few more minutes left, but I am streaming live on my Open Up the Doors Facebook page over at facebook.com/faithfm91.7 if you'd like to join in the conversation over there. And please like the page if you've never liked the page. For those of you who are on Facebook, please, 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 I beseech thee through the mercies of Christ, share this into your streams. Invite people over here to open up the doors. Well, I got a lot more to get to, so I'm going to get to it. There's a scary bill. It hasn't gotten a whole lot of, what's the word I'm going to look for? It hasn't gotten a whole lot of airplay. It's not being really well publicized yet. In fact, I really didn't hear about it until several days ago last week. Tucker Carlson has been bringing it up because it's a really scary bill, and I looked into it a little bit, doing the fact checking. Although I generally trust Tucker, he's usually pretty good in some things. Some things I disagree with him on, but generally speaking, he's brought to the foray this bill that's making its way through Congress right now. It's called the New Way Forward Act, and I don't have a whole lot of time to get into all the details, but it's a really, really terrible piece of legislation that you better pray never sees the light of day. But this New Way Forward bill has been introduced relatively quietly by a Democratic representative from Illinois, this guy Jesus Garcia, and a lot of Democrats are signing onto it, endorsing it. It's gaining steam. It's being supported obviously by the Squad, by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but it's got 44 co-sponsors now amongst the Democrats. It's gaining speed. The thing is, it's also being supported by Bernie Sanders. This bill, the New Way Forward Act, would end America's immigration enforcement system. It would completely end ICE and Border Patrol. Completely. It would open up America's borders to practically everyone. Capital letters. Without any background checks. Amazing how they want so many background checks for American citizens who want to exercise their Second Amendment right. But we don't need any background checks for the entire planet to come into our country if this bill were to pass. It would also make it next to impossible to deport someone for crimes that include auto theft, gun offenses, child abuse, rape, and manslaughter. I am not making this up. The New Way Forward bill, go look it up. If this bill passed, it would essentially destroy our borders and gut all immigration laws, amongst other things. Like I said, I don't have the time to get into it all. Now, honestly, its chances of getting passed are probably zero. Once it gets to if it gets to the Senate, the Republican Senate is going to completely squash it. But that's assuming we keep the Senate. That's assuming they don't just table this legislation and see if they hold on to the House and see if they can get the Senate back. But it's probably not going to pass. But the fact that this bill exists, and is being advocated and pursued, and this is what I want to focus on, because I see people on Facebook saying it's going to get vetoed. It's going to get vetoed. I agree with you. I don't think it'll pass. It might pass if the Democrats take the Senate, as I just said. But here's the point I really want to bring up. The fact that this bill even exists shows you how these people think and the trajectory that this nation is on. That's the scary part. Because the theme for today's broadcast is, could it happen here? And something struck me when I first heard about this bill that's being advocated for and endorsed by more and more Democrats. It's called the New Way Forward Act. That caught my attention because I said to myself, wait a minute, wasn't that the name of, or a similar name to what Chairman Mao Zedong had done in China? Yeah, as a matter of fact, Chairman Mao, back in the 50s and early 60s, had what he called the Great Leap Forward Act. Wow, the wording is awfully close. The New Way Forward. Well, Communist Mao had the Great Leap Forward. The Great Leap Forward in Communist China resulted in tens of millions of deaths, with estimates ranging from 18 million to 45 million deaths in Communist China. Sometimes you just gotta wonder why they name these things the way they name them. When you look through history, it's like this legislation that the Democrats always put forward always have some hint from some past socialist or communist title. It's just something I've noticed in the past. But could it happen here? Could it happen here? If it does, my friends, if by some incredible turn of events, Bernie Sanders was actually able to win the election. And I'll be honest with you, there's the hopeful, optimistic side of me that says it's never going to happen. It ain't going to happen. But like I said, don't ever take it for granted that it can't happen. Not in this zeitgeist. Not in this crazy world. But I'll tell you this much, my friends. If it does happen, it's a sure sign of the judgment of God, giving people the government they deserve. Now, I've preached this for 30-something years. God always gives the people the government they deserve. But look at what we're dealing with. The more godless the electorate becomes, the more likely it is that they will embrace socialism, which is the gateway to communism. Like I said, Bernie likes to euphemistically call himself a democratic socialist, but make no mistake about it, he is a pure Marxist communist whose God is the state. Bernie is just an old value communist who praised the Castro regime and honeymooned in the communist Soviet Union, who praised Daniel Ortega and Hugo Chavez. You can't get any more communist, at least not here in America anyway, than Bernie Sanders. But folks, hear me out here. After throwing God out of our public education system, after throwing our Judeo-Christian foundations under the bus, what a perfectly logical judgment it would be to put into place a government that is fundamentally humanistic and atheistic. You reap what you sow, America. You will reap what you sow, brothers and sisters, no matter what. It is the law of reciprocity in the Word of God. We will reap what we sow as a nation. And we have sown a generation of godless, atheistic, and humanistic philosophies into our educational and social systems. Vladimir Lenin said this: give me just one generation of youth and I'll transform the world. At the Tacoma, Washington event that I alluded to at the top of this broadcast, supporters lined up for hours ahead of the evening rally. And this one girl, an 18-year-old girl, was interviewed. Her name was Callie Randall. She's a high school senior. And she said, quote, Bernie has a movement behind him. I told you, folks, keep your eyes on these rallies. Give me just one generation of youth and I'll transform the whole world. Well, we've given the communists and the Marxists in this country a generation of youth. And I call it the millennial factor. We've given it to them, folks. Could it happen here? Again, I say, I hope not. But I don't discount it out of hand. And it would be very dangerous to dismiss it. It's the millennial factor. Bernie keeps telling these young people how he give them so much free stuff if only they will go with him and vote for him. Bernie's like this guy who's standing out in front of a windowless van telling the kids, come here, kiddies, I'll give you some free candy. He's luring them to his van with candy and puppies. I'm going to say this because it's been said before. Someone has said somewhere down the line, if Santa Claus runs for public office, Santa Claus will always win. Due to this real mal-education that most of these millennials have. They don't admire capitalists like Margaret Thatcher. They admire communists like Che Guevara. And Bernie knows this. And he capitalizes on this. Free health care for all. Legal weed for all. Free college for all. Cancel student debt for all. Free child care for all. Free, free, free. But as we all know, those of us who know how to reason and those of us have life experiences, nothing is free. And someone's going to pay the piper. But you see, these young voters, they didn't grow up with the understanding of the consequences of what Bernie proposes or what people like Che Guevara did to his people, or Stalin, or Pol Pot, or go through the litany of these communist dictators. Oh, but Bernie's not like that. If Bernie Sanders becomes president, I will guarantee you there will be a war. Just saying. Mark my words. But having said all this, and I'm running out of time, there is this. Because can it happen here? Again, I don't think so. I saw this poll the other day that shows a majority of Americans would not vote for a socialist for president. And I say, thank you, Jesus. The survey conducted from January, middle of January, found 53% said they would not vote for their party nominee if they were, quote, a generally well-qualified person for president who happened to be a socialist. 53% said they wouldn't. That's still not really that good. But it's still the majority. Won't vote for a socialist. The Gallup polls show that Democrats were more willing to vote for a socialist, with 76% saying they would vote for the socialist. Well, could it happen here? Could a communist actually get elected? Like I said, the hopeful and optimistic side of me says no way, it will never happen. But I do think, my friends, the answer will be, will the millennials go to the polls and actually vote? Historically, they tend to be no-shows. But if they get fired up regarding the burn, in this zeitgeist, anything is possible. So don't shrug it off. Same old lies, same old results. Socialist, Marxist communism. Never believe the lies, never believe its false promises. Always remember its past. And I just had to rush to get that in. I gotta run, folks. Praise God. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Keep it right here on Faith FM. There's still 24/7 of great Christian programming. I'll see you next week. God bless.